Welcome back everyone! Today I will show you how I spent my last 4 months? 5? Creating this elven coat. My initial concept for the design, the question I was aiming to answer, was how would a steppe elf look? Like we have the Rivendell elves, with their long, elegant, flowy garments, and the wood elves with their more practical stuff, but how would their cousins of the plains look like? So I took the kaftan, a garment my ancestors of the steppe wore, and meshed it together with the more tailored look of the Lord of the Rings elves. And added a sprinkle of embroidery all over it, inspired mostly by the Greek court gown I made a while back. And when I say sprinkle, I mean tons. I wanted it to be dripping with embroidery, just like my court gown did. But before I could design the embroidery, I needed a mockup. So this is where we are at the moment. This is mockup number 1 and 2. I think the color is quite nice at the moment. I don't have any problems with it. My only issue is with the skirt part, or this bottom part, because I kind of want it to be a bit more voluminous. And I have 2 ideas on how to do that. If I have no waist seam, which I would prefer, then this is one idea. Either adding it a gore or just extending it like this. But it has a bit of a weird drape then. My other idea is adding the waist seam, which is kind of a shame. But then you can make this bottom part as like a half circle, and the drape is just so much nicer. For now, I'm pretty happy with the shape. I think the only issue left is I have to add a bit more towards this seam. I have to move the waist seam down a little bit because I put it a bit too high, and also I don't think it's exactly straight. Otherwise, it's a good start. After another round of mockup, I finally had some paper patterns I could scan in, bit by bit, and start designing the embroidery. My design, as it is always the case for elves, was based on the vines and flowers of Art Nouveau, and ended up being 20 hoops in total, just for the body of the kaftan. Because I knew that embroidering that many will probably take weeks, if not months, and I had a very limited supply of the fabric, I decided to lay all the pattern pieces out and thread mark them on. Otherwise, the chalk marks just would rub off as I shift the fabric around. The thread marks also helped with lining up the patterns, but rehooping is always such a chore. Making sure all the patterns line up is one of the worst parts of a big embroidery project. The other is the machine getting stuck on the metallic thread. It basically requires your constant attention for it to go smoothly. So I'm basically done with all of the embroidery, except that there was a bit of a mistake over here, actually on both of the skirt panels. This should have connected to it, but as you can see, there's a huge gap there. So I'm gonna design something to go there, and then embroider it into here and hopefully connect these 2 panels, because otherwise it's very obviously a mistake. The easiest way to getting the hole measured was to literally just scan it in on my printer. Then I could use Illustrator on my computer to design the substitute. So it's done. It's not perfect, but hopefully from afar, and once it's done you won't be able to tell it, and well, it's still a lot better than it was before with the giant gap. These little pieces, if I really want, I can connect them by hand, which I may actually do, depending on how visible it is in the final product. But I think for now it's okay. Not the best, not the worst, it's just okay. The other thing I have an issue with is the back panel. I think you can spot the problem here. I did it with the wrong colors. This is the first panel. See, it's gold here and it's the lighter gold here. I completely switched them up by mistake, which is really bothering me. And also, as you can see, these don't line up actually, which also bothers me. So this is not such a huge piece that I can remake maybe quickly, which I think I will do because it's just bugging me so much. And with this, the back panel is done again. As you can see, that was the previous one with all of its fold. And now look at this, it's perfect. So much nicer, and I'm really happy that I decided to redo it. Now we can finally cut them out and see how they look all put together. I can't wait to sew it together. It's gonna look so cool. It was all cut out, it was finally time to assemble them. First I sewed the bodice pieces together. Oh, it looks so cool. Then I attached the skirt pieces to the bodice. So here we are, all put together. I think it looks great. I'm not sure about the gathers in the back yet. I might rip it all out and put some pleats instead. But otherwise, I'm really happy with how it turned out, and I think we are ready to go and start with the sleeves. Otherwise, tonight I might go and rip these stitches out and make it into pleats. One more thing I figured out, that if I make the sleeves removable maybe, I could use this as a really cool layering vest kind of thing. Speaking of sleeves, it's time to finally pattern them. And figuring this out broke my mind so many times that I don't even remember how I did it in the end. The twist here is that the sleeve opens on the opposite side a normal sleeve would, and it also needs quite a bit of volume towards the bottom. And those two things combined just somehow completely overloaded my brain. At the end, I managed to scrape something together that would suffice, and did the same process of scanning, designing and embroidering as for the main body. These sleeves are very much inspired by my Greek court dresses in terms of the amount and the density of the embroidery, and accordingly it took 4 hoops and 3 hours of embroidery for one sleeve. And while that embroiders, I have time to work on some other things. So I had the idea of using the same gold trim I used in my Greek court dress for trimming this, and actually I think it looks pretty good. I'm not sure about the color though. I might go to the store and see if I can find like a lighter gold, something like this, because it looks great, but it is a bit overwhelming. So I went to the store and I got 2 new colors. They are a bit thinner than the ones I used previously in the Greek court gown, but they have such cool colors. I really like this one, which is like a lighter gold. And looking at them side by side like this, I think I will go with this antique gold because it looks a lot like this embroidery color. I bought 10 meters of it, so hopefully that will be enough to go around all the edges twice. If not, then, well, I just have to go back to the shop. Guys, it looks so great. It's like a little frame for the embroidery, and it looks really nice, I think. The only question left is if I want to put a second row of it. It looks great with 2 as well, but it might be a bit too thick like that. Because the embroidery itself is quite light and with thin lines, so if I put 2 of this, it might just overtake the design a bit too much. Yeah, I think I will leave it with 1. Also, it's easier for me because this is all that I got left from the 10 meters. So I think this probably took up like 7 to 8 meters, I didn't check yet. But I would definitely have to go to the store, which I don't really wanna. So yeah, I think I will leave it at this for now. Then we'll see. So I guess we're off to making some pockets. I wanted this kaftan to have the biggest, admittedly anachronistic, but very useful pockets ever, so I went with a modified 18th century pocket. I cut the far side of the pocket from the fashion fabric because that might be visible from the outside, but I used a thinner cotton for the inner side to avoid bulk. So I got a bit of a problem with the pockets, and by that I mean of the pocket design. I literally spent the last hour making up mock-ups because I can't decide what to do. So my original idea was something like this, but then I realized that kind of looks weird to have just this hole and might be better off making like an actual welt pocket, which is this thing. And then I still couldn't decide. So this is the same welt pocket, just a little thinner, which I think I prefer. I really don't like this thick one. I really don't like welt pockets, that's why I was trying to figure out something else. So this thinner is a good runner-up, but then I made some mock-ups from the actual fabric. This is basically this first one, but with like a little cover inside, like a welt pocket, which actually looks quite nice. And I just realized that I didn't tell you why I'm doing this. My problem is that the way I designed the skirt, which I knew when I was doing it, that it doesn't have a side seam. So I can't just make a normal side seam pocket. But I did it this way because embroidery was easier this way. Well, anyway, so that's why I have to figure out what kind of a welt pocket I'm trying to make. This is the last I made, which is just a normal welt pocket. So basically now we have these 2 runner-ups. The eye-shaped one with a little cover and this welt pocket. My other idea was to add a bit of embroidery around it to make it like an obvious design choice. If I have to have an ugly hole there, at least I make it look pretty. But I'm not sure if it's such a good idea to give a lot of attention to it. It doesn't look bad, but I don't know. Actually, the sun has set for today, so I have the night to think it over, and then tomorrow I will actually make the pockets, hopefully. Alright, so here's the plan. I'm gonna make it a welt pocket with some embroidery. Like this. I already made the file, I just have to mark where it should fall. Somewhere within the seam line and straight down. That won't be easy to hoop, but the file is already here and we're ready to embroider. The assembly of this pocket was quite a process, so let me break it down for you into a step-by-step. Step 1. Put the thinner fabric onto the right side of the coat and sew it together using the rectangle set out by the embroidery. Step 2. Cut the rectangle open like so and flip the pocket to the inside of the coat. Step 3. Understitch the lining fabric using the tiny flaps of the rectangle you just cut. Step 4. Make a little rectangle from the fashion fabric and sew it on using those same little flaps. Step 5. Sew on the fashion fabric side of the pocket and serge it. Step 6. Sew the top of the pocket to the waist seam of the coat. And you're done! With one. Now repeat all of that on the other side too. And by the time I was done with the pockets, the sleeves finished embroidering. So I cut those out. And it was also time to finally cut up my beautiful, although surprisingly very polyester lining fabric. I have 3 yards of this and it was just about enough. I started by assembling the bodice lining. So bad news again. I was a little bit worried when I put on this gold trim on the edge that maybe I should do it after putting in the lining. But I didn't really want to have that stitch line here and I thought it would be cleaner and nicer to do it this way. But now I think that this lining will it will bag away. It's a really big skirt part and I don't think it will stay completely flat. Like I already ironed it and it's still not perfect. I tried to do a bit of a stitch in a ditch on this side. So stitching underneath here. But as you can see, it's very uneven, even though I try to iron it nicely and sometimes it catches it, sometimes it doesn't. It just doesn't look great. So I think the only course of action I can do right now is to take off the trim and re-sew it on top of everything. But first I had to assemble everything. I sewed the skirt lining on right sides facing, flipped it inside out and ironed it. The skirts and the bodice's waist seam to the kaftan's waist seam. And here's the tricky part. Now you sew the bodice lining right sides facing to the bodice of the coat while sandwiching the skirt part inside of it and flip it out through the arm's eye. This way all the raw edges of the waist seams are covered neatly. And it would have been so professional looking. If only it worked. So I went into a bit of a panic mode last night when I saw that the lining made the top part baggy and kind of figured out a way it could work. I basically removed the whole inside. Wait, let me turn it around and then you can see. So basically I redid the whole bodice lining, I removed it and I removed all the stitching from the waist seam. For the skirt, I tried to flatten it out as much while hanging it on the dummy and just pinned it to the seam, the waist seam here. I didn't sew it on yet because I thought I could cover it with the bodice lining, but turns out that somehow the bodice lining is shorter than the actual fashion fabric, like by a lot at some point. But you can see it here, it just barely touches each other. I don't know how it happened, but I know how I could have done it better. I should have just used the fashion fabric pieces to cut out this lining instead of the original pattern. It probably just shifted while I was embroidering it or something. I don't know what happened, but yeah, now I had to add this little extra piece. I tried to line up the pattern, so once I iron it, maybe it's not that visible. So I have this little extra ribbon kind of thing that goes around all the way. It only lines up in the front because that's where it's gonna be more visible. The back you'll never see if I wear it. Sorry if you hear noises, then it's the cat. Now the hard part will be trying to figure out where to sew this to the skirt. I will do this by hand, by flipping this edge back, and I just have to make sure that I sew it to a point where it doesn't pull on it too much, and also it's not too baggy, because otherwise then it won't be nicely lined. It's a nightmare. I hate lining. I don't want to line anything ever again. So this is what it looks like right now. It's much better than it was. I managed to make it as flat as I could. There is no weird bulging issue anymore, but I'm still really angry at myself for ruining the lining, because I bought this very expensive fabric, so the interior would look great as well. My thought was that if I'm gonna spend weeks embroidering this, I might as well make the interior look very nice too. And now it's not nice anymore, because it has this stupid piecing thing, and it's just not as nice and tailored as it could have been if I didn't screw it up. Well, anyway, at least it's looking alright from the outside now. And onto the sleeves. I backlined them, sewing all the way around the edge of it and flipping it through the arm's eye seam. After a thorough press, I top stitched everything 1 millimeter from the edge, because I won't be putting the golden cording on the sleeves. Speaking of, I could finally sew the cording on, which I did by first hand basting it on, then machine stitching it down with a matching gold thread. Back to the sleeves. To set them in, I had to slightly gather them on the top, pin them in place, and sew both of the sleeve layers to the fashion layer of the bodice. This way I could use the lining on the inside to cover the raw edges. For the buttons, I was going for a pichke look, but because actual reproductions are about $10 each and I needed more than 20, I opted to using these brass beads instead. For the loops, I used the same gold cord as for the decoration. The last step was to decide how I want to close my kaftan. Buttons, ties, cords. At the end, I was inspired by these Indian jamas with their exquisitely embroidered ties, and I decided I must design something like it. So I made a mock-up. Scanned it in, and using a Celtic pattern, I created my own little ties. I needed 3 of these, each embroidered in 2 hoops. As this is a side-closing kaftan, you would normally only need 2 ties, but as I discovered, this thing looks pretty cool worn open too, and in that case I didn't want only one side having a tie, so hence 3. Once they embroidered, I cut them out sew them to a piece of lining right sides facing. Flip them inside out and iron them. I also top stitched them just inside of the golden brim to give it a crisp edge. Then I pinned it to place and carefully sewed it on. And with that, we are done with this monster of a project.